Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. What day did our Creator give us to set apart as His Sabbath day? This is such an important topic. We must fear with all of our being to be right on this subject because so much is at stake. Our eternity rests in knowing the correct answer and living that answer. I grew up in a Protestant church where I was taught to accept the Sabbath was on Sunday. As El Shaddai began to call and drag me into the truth, one of the easy things was to realize the fact that the Roman Catholic Empire had made Sunday the official day of worship in the 4th century. The enemy is very clever, though. He has manufactured a smokescreen. Sunday is an easy counterfeit to recognize if anyone truly fears going against their Creator, and they simply examine the evidence with an open mind, not being too proud to admit that they are wrong. The difficulty rests in determining the real truth after you come out of the smokescreen. The smokescreen is the obvious counterfeit. Here is what the Catholic conservative named Patrick Madrid stated on EWTN, a global Catholic radio network, on January 5, 2006. He was answering a question about the Catholic Church changing the day of worship from Saturday to Sunday. There was a distinct break between the Old Testament requirements dealing with the Sabbath worship. They wanted to know that Christianity was distinct from Judaism. The other thing that we should remember too is that our calendar that we follow, including the Seventh-day Adventist, is not only a calendar that was devised by the Catholic Church, but also it is a calendar based upon the solar year, not the lunar year. And the Jewish calendar that was observed in the time of Christ follows a lunar calendar. So the great irony is that the Seventh-day Adventists themselves are not worshiping on exactly the same Sabbath day as the Jews of the time of Christ. What he is saying to all those Saturday worshipers condemning the Catholics for changing the day of worship, who are you to judge us? After all, the Sabbath is not on Saturday. It was not on Saturday during the time Yeshua walked the earth either. Is he correct? Is Satan the deceiver who Scripture tells us deceives the whole world? Is he that clever to put an obvious fraud out there to divert the attention, or a smokescreen to hide another deception? In Daniel 7 we read, "And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and a times and a dividing of time." Before we get into the history of Saturday on the Roman calendar that later became Saturday on modern day calendar, let us examine what the Jewish Encyclopedia admits about the subject. I based my decision to make Saturday my Sabbath because I was told by man, not the Scriptures, that the Jewish people had been given the authority by El Shaddai to keep track of the Sabbath day. So I assumed surely they're right. Bad to make assumptions. This teaching that they taught was based on Yeshua saying in Matthew 23, "Do as those who sat on Moses' seat did, but not after their works." Is the context even the Sabbath day or the calendar? No, he is saying that they give lips, those that sit on Moses' seat give lip service and have a front of righteousness with their speech and their appearance, but they're hypocrites. He's telling them to be righteous and follow the commandments, but in actions and in truth, not just on the surface only. Sabbath and new moon, Rosh Hashanah, are both periodically reoccurring in the course of the year. The new moon is still, and the Sabbath originally was, dependent upon the lunar cycle, according to the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia. Another quote from the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia is, "Each lunar month was divided into 4 parts, corresponding into 4 phases of the moon. The first week of each lunar month began with the new moon, so that the lunar month was 1 or 2 days more than the 4 periods of 7 days. These additional days were not reckoned at all." A quote from a secular historical source, "The 4 quarters of the moon supply an obvious division of the month. It is most significant that in the older parts of the Hebrew Scriptures, the new moon and the Sabbath are almost invariably mentioned together. The lunar month is beyond question an old sacred division of time common to all Semites, even Arabs, who received the week at quite a late period from the Assyrians. They greeted the new moons with religious acclamations." And they quote here, "We cannot tell exactly when the new moon, when the Sabbath became disassociated from the month." Encyclopedia Biblica, 1899. There are many articles from historical sources out there and other Jewish sources too, but let's turn our attention from away what history says for now and turn our attention to the real meat and potatoes. What does our Creator have to say on the subject? In Genesis 1:14, and Elohim said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs," it's for evidence or signals, and for seasons, where there's moed, appointed times or set times, and for days and for years. What were these two great lights? Verse 16 tells us one was the greater light to rule the day, and the other was the lesser to rule the night. So we have these lights placed in the sky by our Creator to determine when His moeds or fixed times are. Now all we need to do is determine whether the Sabbath is a moed or an appointed time or not. Turn to Leviticus 23, and Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, "Speak unto the children of Israel, say unto them concerning the feast," it's not feast, it's 4150, appointed times of Yahweh, "which ye shall proclaim to be holy convocation, even these are my appointed times again. 6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh is the Sabbath of rest." So it's directly referring to it as a moed, a holy convocation. Ye shall do no work therein. It is a Sabbath of Yahweh in all your dwellings. These are my appointed times of Yahweh, even holy convocations, which ye shall proclaim in their appointed times. Pretty straightforward indeed. It's hard to imagine that the smokescreen about Sunday worship has successfully clouded this fact. It is obvious to those religions out there that know the feasts that are detailed in the rest of Leviticus 23 are based on the new moons. So why not the Sabbath? It's just as plainly an appointed time in the same book of Leviticus. Does El Shaddai have two different calendar systems? If so, his second calendar systems, it must be to determine the Sabbath based on a fixed Roman calendar that came from the Julian calendar and later the Gregorian calendars. And if that's the case, then Scripture is in error, because he says he placed the lights there for us to determine when his appointed times are. I can assure you that Scripture is not in error. His appointed times are fixed and established, and they're based on the signs that he gave us to know when they are. The week is not fixed as man's calendar is. Psalms 104, we read, "He appointed the moon for appointed times." So far we have, one, our Creator telling us that the enemy would change his times and laws in Daniel 7. Secondly, we have the Jewish people admitting they did this around 358 AD when Hillel II fixed the calendar. Thirdly, we have several secular sources records that it was done this way. I only mentioned one, but if you fear being on the wrong side of this, look them up. And most importantly, fourthly, we have inspired Scripture telling us plainly the reason Yahweh put the sun and the moon there was for us to have evidence of when his set or appointed times are. And of course, the third reason he gave it is keep track of time. We're also told that the moon is for appointed times. It gets even more serious as you study the history behind Saturn's day, which became Saturday. I want to mention that an obstacle I had to address in this subject, as I was being shown this, was understanding why many different languages use a similar word to the Sabbath to identify Saturday. This is not difficult to understand when you recognize that the Sabbath means the seventh day for the seventh day of rest, and it actually proves that the Sabbath is not on Saturday, because Saturday or Saturn's day was originally the first day of the week. So obviously these languages adopted this after Saturday was moved to the seventh day on the Roman calendar, which is in the 4th century as well. Did Yahweh command the children of Israel to march on the Sabbath? Does he command us to break his laws? Read in Joshua that they marched for 6 days, and then on the seventh day they marched again, this time seven times around the city. If he did not command the children to break his laws, then there has to be an explanation. And the only explanation that they could have marched 7 days, arrayed in full battle armor, I might add, and not march on the Sabbath would be as if they began their march on a new moon day, which is a worship day, but it's not a Sabbath, so they could certainly march on that day without breaking his laws. It just so happens that the book of Jasher tells us that that's exactly when the march began. I'll add that the book of Jasher is given credibility twice in scriptures. In Joshua 10:13 and in 1 Samuel 1:18. Here is the way the days work out in Yahweh's calendar system. The first day of each month is a worship day with no buying or selling. The 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th days are always Sabbaths. Sometimes the 30th day is added because there are only approximately 29.5 days in a month, so there is an adjustment that's made within the heavens themselves that our Creator has put there. It is very important to point out that every single time that weekly Sabbath is mentioned in Scripture, it is on one of these 4 days. It is also important to recognize that nowhere in Scripture does it identify a weekly Sabbath as being on a different day than one of these 4 dates. Also, there are 3 consecutive months in a row recorded in Scripture that have the Sabbath falling on these dates. How is that possible with a fixed 7-day rotation? Answer, it is not. So, every 4th Sabbath we have a Sabbath series beginning on a new set of days of the week on the Roman calendar, the pagan calendar. Does this sound very convenient to modern day schedules? Of course not. But is that what it's about? Convenience? No, it's about obedience, hearkening unto the instructions given to us. In Isaiah we read, chapter 58, if thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of Yahweh, honorable, and shalt honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words. Thou shalt delight thyself in Yahweh, and I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father, for the mouth of Yahweh hath spoken it. It is really a simple matter of choosing to believe your Creator. And going back to Genesis, did he give his servant Moses to record in Genesis 1? And Elohim said, let there be for lights in the firmament of the heaven, and to divide the day from the night, and let them be for evidence, and for appointed times, and for days and years. The Sabbath is most certainly a moed, and Yeshua's certainly did not condemn the Sabbath when he walked here, because it was certainly a day that they were still observing at that time. This change came about in the 4th century. There's so much information that I did not get into here in the Scripture to prove that the Sabbath is based on the new moon and not the conjunction phase that man calls the new moon. And there's also much information out there in history, so don't believe me. If you're going against your Creator, if you're being wrong about something so important, and prove it to yourself. Much is at stake in these last days, and much is being offered. The deceiver has many other smoke screens out there on other topics, and I will address them. Just keep in mind that it is by my Father's perfect design to place Satan here, to allow him to have the deceptive power to broadcast to our minds. This design is to help build a family who wants to do it, to do it their Creator's way. He wants us to fight to be in agreement with him. Narrow is the way, and few find it, because they're satisfied with their life, believing lies. They live for the here and now instead of living to be in his kingdom, to be in his family. All things are simply a matter of believing him and believing his truth and fighting to obey and want him. Satan and his deceptions are and have been a tool to help build holy, righteous character in all those who will overcome him and overcome themselves and yield to their master potter as he builds a family.